defeated that night. The next morning I got up and I was feeling really emotionally spent and tired and discouraged, and I needed to find something to do so I wouldn't think so much. So I settled finally at my piano in my room and I just played a few chords when this deafening explosion shook my building and the windows in my street started shattering. Moments later, I could hear screams, just these penetrating screams, pretty much yards away from my window. There was a busy marketplace, and a bomb exploded in the middle of it, killing 37 people and wounding close to 100. So what I was hearing were the screams of these poor people in puddles of their own blood just begging for help. Pretty soon I could hear sirens going off, tires screeching, ambulances coming, and in all that chaos, all that noise, the only thought I had was, where are my parents? I was alone at home. And so often my parents would go down the street to get some food at the marketplace. So I started running towards the front door, screaming and crying and covering my ears so I wouldn't hear this noise. And I threw myself onto the floor and just prayed that my parents were alive. Moments later, my dad showed up at the door. He had a loaf of bread in his hands. He just bought it at the marketplace. Possibly missed his death by mere seconds. In every speech I give, in every conversation with anyone where I talk about war and what it does to children, I say, I could have lost my dad just for a piece of bread he wanted me to have that day for lunch. That's what wars do to children. I had no words, I just hugged my dad tightly, wouldn't let go for a while. My mom, she took several hours later, and when she finally showed up, we said, what happened to you? Where were you? Well, the persistent person that she is, my mom went to the government building for the 4th time, asking for 2 tunnel permits. And right around the time that she was talking to this government official, the news of this massacre broke into the building. And this man, he just wanted to get rid of my mom. He had more important things to do. So he grabbed 2 pieces of paper, tapped up our names on them, and signed them. And those were our permits to leave that night. We went to the tunnel that night again, and this time we had the permits. Still, we had to wait in a long line of people for about an hour and a half, and the bombing was so intense that evening. One of the bombs exploded so nearby that I just lost it, and at some point I just started yelling at the top of my lungs at the soldier who was checking our permits to hurry up, otherwise we would die before we even got a chance to show him that we had the papers. Finally, we made it to the front, and he allowed us entry into the tunnel. I stepped in, and my feet just disappeared in mud. I couldn't see my boots for the rest of the journey through the tunnel. The stench just overwhelmed me. I could hardly take a breath. I started treading through the mud. As I mentioned earlier, the tunnel would sometimes dip to 4 feet. It was created by just civilians, not some special engineers. So it was dark, and sometimes it would dip and people wouldn't notice. So they would hit themselves on those pipes and bleed and get hurt. So my mom, who was walking right behind me, constantly kept telling me to go even lower. And I, at 5'7", well, I had to keep my shoulders, my back, my head really low, hunched down. I had a backpack on. I had a couple of bags in each hand. And as I looked ahead of me, the tunnel seemed endless. At one point, the stench was just so overwhelming, I felt like I could pass out. The wounds in my legs started hurting. My back started burning from being bent for so long, and I could just feel it. I felt so humiliated, so discouraged. It was as though this last drop just overfilled the cup of my patience, of my optimism, of my belief in this world. So I gave up. I gave up that moment. I started crying. I turned around, ready to tell my mom, I can't walk any longer. I give up. But before I could say anything, my mom, she looked at my tears and she smiled. She said, remember, Nadja, remember your dreams, and you keep walking. So I turned around and I sped up. And I made it through the tunnel because of my mom. Unfortunately, right at the exit, snipers were shooting at people. So many miserable souls who just went through that tunnel died right at the end. For about 20 minutes we were under sniper fire, and I just kept walking, and my mom, who was right behind me, kept saying, "Nadja, keep walking, keep walking." Every so often I'd just turn around to see that she was still behind me. Ahead of us was a 45-minute trip up this mountain called Igman. It was once a famous mountain for those 1984 Winter Olympics. Now it was infamous for all the snipers littering the mountainside. So we had to wait until it was pitch dark to make that journey. We were lucky. We found a ride with this truck driver and 6 other men in the back. And so around 1 in the morning, in pitch dark, we started our journey up this very narrow, winding mountain road. For 45 minutes, the driver could use no headlights. Otherwise, the snipers would shoot at us directly. However, he might as well have been blindfolded, because on another side was a 500-foot vertical drop. So for 45 minutes, my mom and I and 6 other men in the back, we were so quiet. I've never been so quiet in my entire life. I was just focusing on praying and listening to the sound of rocks slipping beneath our tires. After about 45 minutes, the driver turned on the headlights, and we knew that we were past the most dangerous point. All the adults in the back, they lit up their cigarettes. I think they were really nervous for those 45 minutes. And I've never been supportive of secondhand smoke inhalation, but that's the only time that I didn't say anything. In fact, I said something, but nothing to complain, but I'm sure I breathed in a whole bunch of smoke because I was just so happy to be able to talk and that we survived. So we were so lucky. In fact, the previous night, the night that we were denied at the tunnel, 7 people were killed on that road. The journey to Croatia was very dangerous, and my mom and I hitchhiked our way to Croatia. We walked, partly bussed. At the end, we made it just in time to the airport. My mom said goodbye to me. She went all the way back, down the mountain road, through the tunnel, back into the city again. When I once asked her how it went to go through that experience twice, she said, "Oh, it went all right." So that's the kind of amazing, courageous woman my mom is. I came to America alone, and I didn't know much English. In fact, I only knew lines from Tom Cruise movies. They're not very useful. I also thought every man in America looked like Tom Cruise. That was a bit of a surprise. So the first man I saw looked nothing like Tom Cruise, but he was great. He was my host dad. I was matched up with a very wonderful family in Ohio, and they all waited for me at the airport with a big sign that said, "Welcome, Nadja." So my host dad, he embraced me and gave me this small yellow dictionary that translated from English to Bosnian and vice versa. And that began my great journey of learning English. They also sort of plopped me into 10th grade, just 3 days after I'd arrived, and I bet everyone in my high school for the first 2-3 months thought that I was mute. I know it's hard to believe now, but I didn't speak, I didn't feel comfortable with English. But I paid close attention in all my classes. I was so hungry for knowledge. See, the war deprived me of education, so I wanted to learn so much. I also paid close attention in all the hallways, because there was slang, a completely different language that I needed to learn. And I was like a little sponge trying to imbibe every word, every pronunciation. And still, after school, every day, I would spend about 6 or 7 hours doing my homework. That's how long it took me just to do some basic English, some math, some history. I was always surrounded by dictionaries, the sources, encyclopedias.